So let's welcome our session chair and the speakers of the first plenary session on lessons learned from contract management and dispute resolution after 1 year of COVID-19. We welcome the session chair, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, Advisor, Procurement Policy Division, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, and our speakers, Mr. K.R.M. Rao, Executive Director, GAIL India Limited, Ms. Pratibha Jain, Founding Partner, Nishit Desai Associates India, and Ms. Deepika Kinhal, Lead Judicial Reforms and Senior Resident Fellow, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, India. With this, I hand over the session to the session chair, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all my fellow panelists and all people who are connected. Uh, the topic which has been given to us is regarding lessons learned for contract management and dispute resolution after 1 year of COVID-19. I am fortunate to have a very distinguished panel with me to take this session through. As per the program which has been given to us, each speaker will be given 20 minutes of time, and that will be followed by some question answer and some discussions. Because I'm told that almost 1,000 people are connected, hence we may expect large number of comments and questions. And in fact, we'll be having the large number of audience who can give very different and the fresh perspective than what the panelists have. So I will request that all the panelists may strict those timeline of around 20 minutes, which has been given by the organizers. That will be good for us. And kindly permit me to intervene once your 20 minutes are over. So that's my second request is there. Let me just introduce a topic the way I've understood. I will not be telling anything for per se. I will be just taking through the different steps which has been taken by the Government of India in last 1 year, especially in the area of the public procurement in view of the COVID-19. So that's exactly I wish to tell. I must confess all of these is already in public domain. So I will not be telling anything which is a secret or something new. It's not something budget. It is all information which is already available in public domain. Let me try to share my screen. Yeah, thank you. It's a very small presentation, just 5-6 slides. I will very quickly go through them. We something in the month of February, we issued the first circular, in fact, much before the lockdown, where we clarified that all the events which is affecting the supply chain in the country because of the restriction of the goods and even people from China and some neighboring countries, they will be measure clause and the instructions of the force measure which are already available through the procurement manuals will be applicable. Please understand, it is not something new. We just clarify that it will be done because there was a certain people were not really sure whether these events will be a part of the force measure clause. One, moving forward in May 2020. You may recall this was a time when the Atmanirbhar 1 was announced. And by that time, many of the contractors were feeling the pinch in terms of liquidity. Two specific instructions were issued at that point of time. One, the Government of India has decided that the performance security, which is normally given whenever the contracts are placed on any contractor, vendor or supplier, will be refunded in the proportionate basis for the works completed. So in case someone has completed 50% of the work, normally security deposits or the performance securities are released after the completion of the entire work. But as a special case, we have decided that in case 50% of the work has been completed, we will refund the 50% security deposit. First thing was done. And second instructions was that for all such contracts which has been affected due to COVID-19 will increase the delivery period or the time of completion will be extended by at least 3 months. And of course, this will be without imposition of any cost or penalty from the government side. And these instructions were applicable for each and every government contract, whether they are placed by the ministries, department, autonomous bodies, statutory bodies, even the public sector undertakings of all the central government. Many of the state governments have also issued similar instructions on their own based on our instructions. Moving forward, then next at the third announcement made by the government as a part of the Atmanirbhar 1 was regarding the global tender. In order to have a split of the local and give to Philip to the local industry, it was decided that the global tenders up to 200 crores will be more restricted. It was never banned, or it was only said restricted means they will be approved at a much higher level to understand whether they are necessarily required. So that was the third instruction. I must say, what's the global tender definition? Because there's what is the meaning of the global tender? The global tender, as per the manual of the procurement issued by the Ministry of Finance, means where the bids are invited in at least one foreign currency. So in case you are calling a bid only in the rupees, that's not a global tender. You are calling the bids in a multiple currencies. That's the definition of a global tender. Moving forward, in July 2020, because of the many situations not directly related to the COVID, but some thing happening on the borders, an instruction was issued that for the bidders coming from the countries sharing land border with India will be required a prior registration from the DPIIT, Department of Promotion for Industry and Internal Trade. Again, it must be understood there is no bar or there is no only thing. These bidders will be required to register with the DPIIT, and there is some due diligence will be done. Next set of the instructions come at the part of the Atmanirbhar 3, where the two instructions has come. One, the performance security has been reduced to 3%. Some performance security of 5%. Some people used to take the performance security of 10%, which has been reduced to 3%. And this is for all the contracts, and this will be applicable up to all the contracts placed even in 2021. Secondly, the bid security which is taken at the part of when the bidders fill up the tenders, that has been also no provisions need to be kept, and we just take a certificate. A certificate essentially means the bidder declares that in case I will run away before the contract is placed to me, I can be debarred for a certain period. The idea of both these instructions were that the more money will be available with the existing contractors, and identifying that there is already liquidity crunch in the economy. I think this should have been my last slide. Thank you. So, so with this small presentation, let me go to my first panelist, Mr. K.R.M. Rao. He is Executive Director, GAIL. A very long experience of more than 30 years. He is currently heading the procurement team of GAIL. He is a mechanical engineering graduate. It's a long going to read all of them because we would love to have this time to listen from his experience. So over to you, Mr. Rao. Kindly guide us, especially regarding the challenges faced by GAIL, by the contractors, or maybe even the employees in tackling the procurement side of the COVID-19. Over to you, Mr. Rao.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Sanjay sir. To all my co-panelists and who are joined through virtual mode. Yeah, today the topic we gave to me, challenges faced by contractors and employees during the COVID pandemic, and how we have addressed those. And just I share because my time slot is 20 minutes. I would like to share few slides, then we will discuss on this. I hope it is visible.
Yes, it is visible. Thank you.
Okay. Quickly we go to the topic. These are the challenges. Yeah, rightly, Mr. Sanjay sir has given outline of the policy decisions taken by the government of India. Being public sector, though GFR rules were not applicable for all of us PSUs, but still we adopted all these measures. What explained by Mr. Sanjay was adopted in PSUs, and GAIL is one of that. Therefore, we have upfront experience on these issues. The contractors. The first one is a delay in performance of contractor, because literally the lockdown made them no movement of goods, no movement of manpower, no movement of equipment. So we have cross country pipelines, erection, construction in plants. So this is badly affected due to this COVID pandemic. So this is the major one which affected us in delay in performing the contractors and their subcontractors agencies. Literally, there was no movement of anyone. So this availability of labor, this migration labor, you are all seen all those TV sets. That's how this migration happened during this pandemic. It was a huge problem for GAIL to deal this issue of retaining manpower at the workplaces and getting the material from the suppliers to complete our projects. That was the major issue we faced, and the availability of cash flow. So this is even individuals faced. At the same time, these contractors, the resources, cash, without cash, nothing moves in the contracts management. So these were the challenges being faced by them. And increase in input cost. Everything gone up. All input cost, all consumables. And for the same manpower, in any case, they are not even available at the sites. These are the thing. And access to lending, banks are under shutdown, and lockdown, the contractors unable to approach banks to get their financials in place. And how we dealt these issues. Yes, of course, there is a government support on policy decisions, various measures. The payment to manpower costs, though there was not much instruction from this, but being a responsible organizations to the society, we have taken care their manpower wages part during this lockdown period, when literally the job is get on halt. So during this period, we ensured that every employee of this contractor got the minimum wages what they supposed to get from the contractor, that we paid directly by the organization. I think it is followed by every PSU, I hope. As far as GAIL concerned, it is 100% we ensured the payment. And faster payment to the contractor. We literally made payment through e-mode. Every payment we got, even bills got through scanned copies, and sometimes in a WhatsApp calls, we got the contractors' bills and we processed them based on the copies of those bills. Later on, we could regularize those, but this is one of the major measure. We made the payment very fast so that contractor get a cash flow in his hand. And we sent individual mails to all vendors and contractors, verifying about the situation at their end, how their factories are performing, how their offices are performing, how they are delivering their duties, and what measures GAIL has taken, we conveyed through this mail. And as explained by Mr. Sanjay, this force majeure clause, we treated this 3 to 6 months, we treated it as a force majeure, and we have extended contract periods accordingly to the force majeure condition, wherever subject to those conditions already explained by him. And the reduction of security deposit, yeah, that is 5 to 10%. Government said in GAIL it is 10%, and we reduced it to 3% for it is going to be followed till December 21. So this is one of the major relief to the contractors, where they could get their amounts released from the banks and from our account through BG. If it is BG, we release the bank guarantee limits, and in case of cash deposits, we release the remaining 7% to the contractors. And also we have relaxed the timelines for submission of this security deposit. For a new contract during pandemic, we have allowed them further. Traditionally, we gave 30 days period, that we have even increased it to 90 days in some cases. And further, we introduced a bill watch system, that is, they can see their bills how getting processed within GAIL by sitting in their own offices. In any case, they have sent the scanned bills, and we entered into bill watch system. The vendor contractor can access this movement of bill from there, and any hiccups, they can immediately call concerned how their bill got stuck up. And we have introduced one more Anjani portal. The physical measurement is the major obstacle during the COVID period. How people will measure the work done, and how it is going to be submitted through measurement books. This we have taken away, and we have introduced an e-measurement system, where contractor will put their measurements on mode, and our ES engineering in charge, so called, will certify that, and it will process through our finance mode. And we have given mobilization advances to the contractors in 2 installments, 5%, and immediately after submission of this scanned bill, we have released 70% upfront, in the subject to that it is pending for processing at our end. And extended stay compensation, wherever they are due to pandemic, it is getting they stuck in that, we have compensated to some extent the extra stay at site. And we have introduced during this pandemic period a vendor feedback portal. The vendor feedback portal is this, wherever the issues being faced by them can be punched on this portal, which is available on those who are active contractors and vendors for GAIL. And during the tendering process, how we dealt, it was very difficult to get the tenders, bid submission by the contractors, because literally their offices also got closed. And during this period, we have literally reduced our e-procurement threshold limit to 2 lakhs. Earlier we have 7 lakhs and above is e-procurement. Now we made it to 2 lakhs, so that every tender gets processed through e-procurement module, so that vendors, by sitting their residences also, they can bid for GAIL contracts and goods. So this pre-bid meeting earlier we used to have in a conference hall, we have taken away, and we have allowed them through virtual platforms, all pre-bid queries in this meets. And unpriced price bid opening as per mandatory CVC guidelines, we have to make them part while opening the bids. That also we made through e-mode only. They can see literally how we are opening the bids on the system. And the ECPC meets is nothing but one of the decision-making body of the GAIL, where the purchase procurement decisions being taken. Those also we have made a digital thing. The directors are sitting in a studio room, virtual studio room. There, the people, the board taken a decisions for placing the orders. And the reverse auction training, these are the tools. Normally we impart them in physical mode, but during this period we have taken away. We have introduced e-tools, e-training modules, and e-approvals also we have introduced. And now already it is explained, no EMD during this period. And wherever it is already part of the tender, we got them at later date, they can submit this EMD. And submission of attested copies, the bid qualification criteria is being attested earlier by the agencies. We are enmarked for the attestation of these documents is taken away. And we said only L1 bidder, after opening the prices, whoever becomes L1 can submit this at later date. And technical evaluation through mails we did. And all fees, demonstration fees, BGs, all these things we maintained through e-mode. and it is wire transfer and self-certified copies we accepted during this period. And employees front, when we go to this running plant and pipeline with lesser manpower, it is a big challenge for us because it is 24/7 operations. The flowing gas is a continuous process. Therefore, we have ensured certain people we retained in the plant, and we have made arrangements for their boarding, lodging within the plant, and we maintained and we helped their families for not to face any issue when the employee is working inside the plant for weeks together. And work from home also, this is a new normal, and we had to our HR department, all other organizations, I hope, taken these measures, and we have ensured work from home and a flexible hours for employees, those who wanted to wish to come at 2 o'clock and go by this period. All those measures we have introduced. And quarantine after outstation visit, we have allowed official quarantine, and the same time we have accommodated it as a work from home. And we have ensured mental and physical health of employees by calling our doctors within GAIL, and we have empaneled hospitals. We have assigned them to call the people, call the societies, and inquire their the COVID spread among the families. And we have allowed our SAP, business system, which day in day out employees use it to work. We have allowed them to access from their own laptops at our desktop and in the residence with certain firewalls and all. So these are the things we made employees be comfortable while delivering their duties. And parallelly, we have a society, a community thing. By seating certain people, we made certain flexible rota among the employees, mostly based on the individual state governments. We have across around 60-70 offices across the India. So we have made local instructions, guidelines given by the local authorities to be followed. And quarantine leave, I already explained. Employees on leave out of station during that lockdown period allowed their residences in their native places to as a work from home measure, and till the trains and flight services resumed, allowing a business class travel to all employees 45 years, above 45 years. Later on, we have even reduced every employee can travel in a business class, so that this can avoid the exposure to the pandemic, the COVID. And online ESC coachings during this work from home period. So we gave certain modules to the engineering charges. They are the people who execute the jobs in the field. We taken certain coaching classes to them, and we trained them during this leisure hours from their houses, and we gave some tests also, so that they can improve their skill sets. And online training on different softwares courses we have introduced during the 6 months period when they were working from home, and access to different articles. Our library also gave a login IDs to the employees, so that they can access to the GAIL libraries, and they can see the e-books by sitting in their homes. And in motivation part, we have made counseling sessions to the adopting the new normal. And whoever recovered, around odd 300 employees exposed to COVID, all these people, these recovered employees have been contacted, and we made certain online sessions. So how their experiences in overcoming this COVID also organized. And during this period, we have given certain online quizzes, invited articles for knowledge sharing, and how the lockdown experience, how the people spent their life at their homes. They can take a videos, and we have published that as a lockdown chronicles, so that every employee, most our contractors, vendors can how the GAIL dealt this situation, can have the online experience. And we have distributed mass sanitizers voluntarily by GAIL to the employees and contract workers. It is plenty of things we have distributed among them so that they need not have any trouble in getting these PPEs. And the pulse oximeter, thermometer, certain equipment also we made distribution free to among the employees and contract workers. And home isolation kit, we have Apollo MOU with them to Apollo Kavach is the tool kit which is given to the all whoever exposed to the COVID. They got the Apollo Kavach home isolation kit where Apollo doctors attended our COVID employees, COVID faced employees. And certain hospitals we exclusively made as empaneled hospital. Whenever they go to inpatient, then we have made arrangements for our employees to take this part. And these are the things already I explained a lot. Many e-initiatives during this period initially I explained. And e-attendance we have introduced. People need not sign the attendance registers. And important downloads also provided by IT team whenever they face in the while doing the work from home. These are the things we have taken measures. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Rao. And in fact, your presentation has already started evoking some comments and questions, which we'll be taking during the later parts after other two panelists as well. Okay, so let me move to my new next panelist. And the problem, a small problem I'm facing, I got two documents from organizers, and the sequence of the next panelist is different from in both the documents. So I will go by the sequence which is in public domain. And so let me invite Pratibha Jain. She is founding partner of Nitish Desai Associates, Delhi. She, after doing her graduation and LLB from Delhi University, she has done Bachelor of Civil Law degree from Oxford and LLM from Harvard. She has already worked in New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and she has been recently awarded Women Lawyer of Year Award 2019 by Business World magazine. So it's a very, very impressive CV. I think it will be gaining a lot with the her interaction, and I've been told that she will be bringing the private sector perspective, that how these private sector people have coped up with the government contracts. But please feel free to deviate from the topic, because I think we will be having many things to tell. Over to you, Pratibha.
Thank you, sir. I will just shortly try and share my screen. Let me know when it's available. But in the meantime, can I just say it's, I think the way the Indian government has dealt with the pandemic and the courts, and just hearing Mr. Agarwal and, our panelists from GAIL, it's really important to have that kind of agile governance in the country. And I think India has been, in that sense, very fortunate that, basic amenities were not affected. And, things were managed really well. And we saw that in the private sector. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, it's visible now. Yes, it is visible now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just
so
make it
I
full
was,
screen. Just make it to the presentation mode.
I did. Maybe one of the.
Okay. If it is visible to other people, we may continue with this. Please continue. I think in case there's some other, please continue.
Sure. So we saw, of course, the pandemic hit the private sector quite hard. Both consumers and parties to various contracts, and of course, in procurement, international trade, manufacturing sector, which affected the whole supply chain, contracts below it. So it's been massive job for us, especially very early on in the pandemic to ensure that all businesses can run smoothly, and helping various businesses understand how it affects their business and how it affects the contracts. So today I will just mainly talk about our experience in dealing with dispute situations and interpretation of contracts, because it was a totally new situation globally, and in India, and how the suspension of contracts happened, whether through termination or interpretation of the force majeure clauses and the MAE clauses, and of course the government intervention that the first two panelists have already talked about. Now, in very early on in February itself, the government, through the Minister of Finance, also declared that the force majeure clause can be invoked wherever considered appropriate. Thus signaling, even though it was for government contracts, giving a very important signal to the market that this is something that can be interpreted, and some relief can come from contracts where enforceability of the contracts is becoming a problem. Now, even though early on the courts and the government declared the event as a force majeure, it didn't lead to automatically giving relief on various contracts, because even for a force majeure, you need to first look at whether how it has really affected the contract in a particular situation. So you need to ensure that you look at the causal connection between the force majeure event and hindrance to the performance of the contract. If your contract is not affected because or performance of your contract is not affected by force majeure, just a declaration of force majeure does not give a right to stop services or take any relief under the agreement. So, for example, I'll talk about later how, where there were essential commodities, the contracts needed to be performed because government had given exceptions for essential commodities in their contracts. Let's just look at a typical clause for force majeure as it used to be before COVID-19 hit. So basically, it allowed that none of the parties to be liable for any delay, failure, and performance loss or damage due to force majeure events. And force majeure events were defined to include various circumstances that we are used to, including, earthquake, riots, strikes, explosions. Most importantly was what has been really used is the act of God. And that's a very standard provision in a force majeure clause in any agreement, to have an exclusion for any acts of God. And thankfully, again, the courts and the government interpreted force majeure to be an act of God, which really helped with the agreements. Like I said, the Indian Contract Act looks at a doctrine of frustration and not just the fact that there is a force majeure. And to determine whether there is a doctrine of frustration that is applicable, you just need to see whether the performance became impossible by way of fact or law. And the fact here took time to play out. So early on itself, for certain of our clients, our advice was you can't yet declare frustration, even though there is pandemic, unless there is a time period in terms of which your revenue are affected and your production is affected. You really cannot declare force majeure. So there was only, when the pandemic got into a full blow and there was a lockdown and there was cessation of production, that we were able to tell our clients that now, is a decent chance for you to claim, and you have to claim. You can't just sit on it and say, oh, force majeure happened. You have to give notice to the other party. Section 56 of the Indian Contract Act, which deals with doctrine of frustration, is a positive rule of law, which basically means that you can't leave it to the intention of the parties to determine whether or not this happened. It is something that is to be determined by law. So in this case, it will be on the courts to decide, and not just based on the intention of the party. It's defined by the act itself. And given if your contract did not have a force majeure clause, then you would have had to go to court to kind of have it enforced. And that's why it's very important. We go back in common law countries, you need to have, including India, very strong contracts, and look at your contracts very closely to think of any such situations which can affect your business tomorrow. Now, as I already mentioned, the courts came out with judgments very, very quickly. By April itself, we had High Court judgments on the issue, where the Delhi High Court had declared that the outbreak of coronavirus was prima facie in the nature of force majeure. And in that case, the clients were able to get an invocation of stay on the invocation of a bank guarantee. However, in another case, as I mentioned, because it was essential commodities, similar relief was not given. In our big transactions, we typically have an MAE clause, which is a material adverse effect clause, which is much more negotiated and more detailed than just a force majeure clause, because these are typically international agreements or agreements of high value. And so the negotiation with respect to what would be considered a force majeure and what are the outs and opt-outs are heavily negotiated. So what I've included is a typical clause that we used to have before force majeure, which basically would give various criterias, including effect on the business, on the revenues, the financial condition and the operation and the prospects of the company. And this would have to have a material effect on these businesses. If you're able to even the word material, it gets negotiated very heavily. Sometimes you will, for example, this is a buyer-friendly clause, so we have not included material to start with. We just say if it has an adverse effect, any event that has an adverse effect on business or the business prospects would be considered a MAE, and you have an opt-out of the clause. However, the counterparty will negotiate and would put the word material, and then in many cases, even the material is defined. So, is it 50% of your revenues that get affected or 25%, is highly negotiated between the parties. What is standard is the next few clauses, which is the ability of the parties to perform the agreement, the validity or enforceability of the agreement being affected, and the status or validity of any consents required for the company to carry on business, which is basically change in law. To this, there's usually exceptions that are also provided. Let me just...
Can I just stop you for a minute? Your presentation is not moving. So in case, I will request, in case console can share the presentation, or so that people can also see the presentation. So I will request Pratibha, kindly, you may stop sharing the presentation. Yeah, thank you. Now console may kindly share the presentation, and Pratibha, you have to guide him by telling wherever you want to move the slide.
Sure.
Yeah, please keep on saying next so that he will keep on moving.
Yeah, you can keep going. I've covered all of this. Next. 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 So you can go to the material adverse change. Keep going. So this is the material adverse change clause that I was just discussing. Sorry, just go up. One slide, please. This is a typical, this is an actual MAE clause that was enforced by us in a particular contract. It was a more than $500 million contract. And this contract was entered into the definitive agreement in February, when pandemic had already hit, but it was not as big as, not everybody could tell the effect of it is going to be as massive as it turned out to be. Now, the MAE was defined as material event 1 and material event 2. Material event 1 here was when there is an effect, any act of God, which results in the revenue of the company falling below the material threshold, and material threshold was defined as more than 50%. Material 2 was so this was a contract for sale of toll roads, and it was 5 toll roads that were getting sold, and each SPV under it had the toll roads. So there were concession agreements under the main SPA where there were force majeure events. So material event 2 was invocation of the force majeure under each of those agreements. Now, when this got negotiated, it was highly negotiated, and the exception that they did not want was that we had the ability to continue with this MAE clause exit provision as long as the event which would have caused it, whether material event 1 or material event 2, if it continued and was not cured. And that was something that they did not want. They said, at a particular time, if this is met, fine, but we don't want it to be an ongoing exemption available to you. I remember it was the commercial parties were negotiating. We had completed our legal negotiation, and the clients called me at 2 a.m. and said, this is the sticky point. And this is February. So I said, listen, just imagine what's happening in China. If it spreads across the world, what will happen? My suggestion to you is you stick to this clause. And the client pushed back a little, saying, this is the only point left, we should give it up. And the legal department sign off is required, and they require my sign off. And I said, I really don't think that a party of, this was a private equity, a big sovereign wealth fund. And I told them, I don't think, it's a reputational issue for you if you don't have an exit available, if it's an ongoing issue globally that affects the value of the deal. And finally, we agreed to keeping that provision. And by April, it was very clear. So material event 2 also had a provision where the government announces for any reason that tolling revenues getting affected by any government announcements. And government had announced that there would be no tolls on roads for a certain period. And that was an ongoing event, and the pandemic also became an ongoing event, because of which we were able to ensure that there was that we could exercise the clause, and the buyer could get out of otherwise a very sticky situation where they would have bought an asset that would have had a revenue loss for more than a year. Ultimately, the parties got onto the table to renegotiate the contract, and that's where it really helped. Because otherwise, there is value for the deal because you're buying, for a foreseeable future, but you were able to negotiate the agreement to reduce the value for the loss of revenue for that 1 year. So this just goes to show, even though you're not including specifically the word pandemic, if you negotiate your clause really well, then and you need to think of all the possible situations up front in a particular business that can affect the revenue of the company, then you can still be covered without having actually used the word pandemic. And globally in the legal community, you know, a lot of the clauses, especially internationally, because they didn't use the word pandemic, it became an issue in terms of exercise of the contract. Can go to the next slide. So this is just what the material event 1 and material event 2 was. Can go on, please. We can go to the next slide. So whether a pandemic affects your M&A agreement or commercial contract, as I mentioned, will depend on the specific language of the clause. And you know, our advice to everybody is that when you're a buyer and you are seeking to terminate due to an MAE clause, you will need to show that the pandemic has caused a long-term and material adverse change to the seller's business. This is the crux, because when you sit for negotiations, if you can convince the counterparty of this and you get your safeguard for this clause, then everything else will get covered. Today it's a pandemic, tomorrow it can be anything else. But this is the core of it, where you need to protect your business. But similarly, for the non-performing party to invoke a force majeure clause in a commercial contract, you should be able to establish a link or a connection between the underlying COVID-19 event and the inability to perform its contractual obligation. Next slide, please. I think we've already discussed the government intervention, so I'll skip this for now. We can get to the next slide. So I'll move on to, you know, how dispute resolution happened during the pandemic. Next slide. So immediately upon the lockdown, physical court hearings could not happen, and I think you know, access to justice became a big concern for India. You know, we are comparatively, like US, a very litigious society, and the number of cases pending in India are very high. And then not to get access to courts, specifically where your contracts are not clear and you need to go to court to get them enforced, it became an issue. But the Supreme Court actually moved very quickly, and by 26 March, it started doing e-court hearings, and we did a few of them and worked really well. I wouldn't mind, you know, if we went permanently virtual, because I think there are significant upsides, especially for our clients who come from far-flung areas and have to travel and have to bear the cost of, you know, hiring only Delhi lawyers, which can be comparatively expensive. This, you know, just gives an equal footing to the rest of the country, which is otherwise, because the Supreme Court only, you know, we only have one Supreme Court, makes it very, very expensive affair to get yourself heard at the Supreme Court level. It also created significant issues in terms of, the biggest issue was confidentiality, because once you got the link, you could share it with anybody. And we also had very, very funny situations sometimes when people didn't realize that they're in front of the Supreme Court and visible. But other than that, I think for courts also, you know, they have now adapted to technology really well. In fact, recently in a Delhi High Court hearing, the judge asked, when one of the seniors mentioned that they are not available for the hearing and seeked an adjournment, they basically told them to provide a recording of their arguments, so they don't have to be physically present. And that again, you know, really helps reduce the cost for the litigants. because they don't then have to bear the cost of the other side lawyers asking for adjournment, and justice can happen more quickly. So I think, with a hybrid model where you can have both physical and virtual hearings, and, we solve for confidentiality issues, I think the future looks really bright. Next slide, please. So the Supreme Court, of course, not only themselves started doing hearings, but also ordered for all the other courts to start taking actions in this regard. The arbitrations, initially we got a lot of adjournments, but very quickly, because in India, again, you get a lot of the Supreme Court, ex-Supreme Court judges as arbitrators. So initially they had challenges with doing this online because we just not had the mindset. We've always had physical arbitration hearings. But again, they took on to it very well after a couple of months, and now we have online arbitration hearings through video conferencing really well, and it's really helped again reduce the cost, because sometimes your arbitrators are in different cities, and your lawyers are in different cities, and your litigants are in different cities. So this has really helped reduce cost and made it much more efficient. There is some degree of lack of being able to express yourself as a lawyer in both the courts and in arbitration, but I think over time the parties will adjust themselves to this mode. Can we go to the next slide? We can go on. So with the various measures that were announced, whether in change in regulations by the government or through orders of the court, whether it was a moratorium on IBC proceedings, various compliance waivers that were given by the government across acts, taxation moratoriums that were put in terms of filings, etc. All of that really, as we came up with issues and highlighted to the government, we saw the orders coming from the various ministries and the courts really, really quickly, and ultimately it was really smooth. To the extent now, earlier it was very difficult to do execution of documents. That has changed significantly. I don't think I would have printed an agreement in the last 6 months, whereas I used to do it on a daily basis, thousands of papers. So it's a sea change, and we are hoping, in a country where you had to sign every page, adapting to digital signatures is a massive leap forward, and we are hoping this can continue even post the pandemic getting over. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is just statistics. Sorry, previous slide. This is just statistics, to show how important these online mechanisms will be in the future, because already we had significant delays in hearings, and we have seen that fall significantly across high courts, across Supreme Court. And so, while there has been adoption of technology by the courts, I think it needs to be done at a much quicker and a much greater level than it is being done now. Next slide, please. online dispute resolution is something that is coming up globally. We have seen that companies anyways now prefer dispute resolution through arbitration and not litigation. So at least for commercial disputes, arbitration is a preferred mode. If now we can move that also to an online system, and there are various platforms that are now providing the online dispute resolution mechanisms to deal with confidentiality, to deal with technology issues, providing the smoothest system where you can have two rooms, one party in one room, one party in the other, doing mediations, doing arbitrations on that basis. So we are really hoping these ODR mechanisms can really help streamline this process going forward. Next slide. So for us, the outcomes of COVID-19 for dispute resolution has been just the importance of technological infrastructure and upgradation to tackle such unforeseen situation in the future. Today, it's this pandemic. There are talks about being versions of it in the future. You have to think about warlike situations in the future. It is a more uncertain global world than we have seen before, and I think having norms that will help with a very strong technological infrastructure being provided. And India has the highest digital penetration in the world, and so we really should be using that to build the legal infrastructure for dispute resolution. The contracts can't be, typically the dispute resolution clause, your force majeure clause. These are standard clauses that sometimes get ignored. And this is now again a wake-up call for the legal community to ensure that you're focused on what happens in unforeseen situations and account for those. We can move on. What we have seen is there is a change in the way the force majeure clause and the MAE clause is drafted to have specific exclusion for pandemics and widespread diseases. Like I said before, the sellers should add the pandemic or widespread diseases language to their MAE clause, whereas if you're a buyer, you should resist it being an exclusion from your exit clause. Sorry, next slide. So this is how the MAE clause has been modified post-pandemic. You have a specific exception you can see in clause 3 for epidemics, pandemics included to other natural disasters like earthquakes, hurricanes, etc. What also is typically there is a disproportionate clause, which is an exception to the pandemic clause, which basically says that if you read from provided further, with respect to clause 3 above, such changes, events, or occurrences do not materially and disproportionately adversely affect the company and its subsidiaries. But it doesn't stop there. It says taking into account and compared to other companies operating in the same industry. So this is what's going to get negotiated heavily, whether you have this exception and to what extent is that exception. Do you compare it to the other industry players in the market, or is it a standalone affecting the business prospects of your company? Next slide, please. So that's broadly from me on dispute resolution and contract management. One thing, sorry, that I'd added last, which is not there in the slides, was on mediation. I think the importance of mediation also cannot be emphasized enough in the change global pandemic scenario. We are still not seeing it being used in India as much as it should be, because there's just not enough push from the legal industry itself. It doesn't. It's a much cheaper option for the litigants. So obviously, lawyers themselves will not like it. But I think in the interest of reducing the burden on courts and reducing the cost for litigants, I think the government and the court should really look at mandatory mediation for commercial disputes. They've already put that in for commercial courts, but the rules have not been signified yet. But I think its importance can't be undermined. I'll stop right there.
Yeah, thank you, Pratibha. Let me now call Deepika Kinal. She is the lead judicial reforms and the senior resident fellow with the Center for Legal Policy, and she has been very closely working with the government. She is part of Jaldi mission, which is justice access and lowering delays in India. She is the also assisting the expert committee on ODR, which Pratibha is saying. And in fact, I've been told that ODR will be the core again on which she will be speaking today. She is also the part of the Supreme Court India subcommittee on e-courts projects. And apart when she is not worrying about the judiciary in India, she also sings, paints, and she is a trained Carnatic classic music. Over to you, Deepika, for ODR or anything related which you wish to tell. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal. In fact, that was a perfect note for me to start from, where Ms. Jane left off, which was talking about mediation, mandatory mediation, and a brief gist on ODR that she talked about. I will take off from there, and my presentation is going to be forward-looking and solution-oriented, looking at really how businesses of all kinds can move forward and not really be held back due to unresolved disputes. Is this visible?
It's still not visible.
Okay, let me wait for that to...
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it has come. Just kindly make it in presentation mode.
Sure. Is this fine now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
please
perfect. Right. So as I mentioned, I'll be taking off from where Ms. Jane left and deep diving into one of the aspects that she talked about, which could facilitate effective, efficient, and speedy resolution of disputes, especially those that have arisen during the COVID pandemic. So online dispute resolution, the term is quite self-descriptive. However, there is more to it than meets the eye. This is something that me and my team discovered during our engagement with Niti Aayog, which has constituted a committee specifically looking at online dispute resolution and ways and means of mainstreaming ODR as part of the dispute resolution ecosystem in the country. This is a committee that is chaired by Justice A.K. Sikri. He is the retired Supreme Court judge, and the report is currently pending with the PMO for its approval. So we are hoping to see a lot of measures being taken by both the government and the judiciary in the coming few months to truly adopt and mainstream ODR. Having said that, I think we first need to have a conceptual understanding of what ODR really is. Now, as I said, it is self-descriptive. However, it is an evolving concept. That is because ODR is intrinsically linked to technology. And as we know, technology is ever evolving and ever changing. So as the technology progresses and newer developments come into market, ODR will equally benefit from those developments. So simplistically put, ODR is usage of information and communication tools to enable parties to resolve their disputes. Now, this usage of ICT tools can be both in an aggregated form as well as in a consolidated form. What I mean by this is that if you use multiple already available technology tools to aid in your dispute resolution, that constitutes ODR. So it is not just mere exchange of emails, perhaps to schedule a physical hearing. That would not constitute ODR. However, if you're using email to exchange documents, then you're scheduling a virtual hearing, then you're using transcription tools, and then you're using e-signatures. All of these individual technology tools coming together to aid in dispute resolution constitutes online dispute resolution. In the first phase of ODR, what we are seeing is exactly what Ms. Jain spoke about, which is infusion of technology in existing ADR mechanisms. So arbitration, mediation, negotiation, conciliation, plus technology is essentially what first phase of ODR is. And here again, what we are seeing is it could either be that the parties are using only virtual hearing rooms that private ODR service providers offer to parties, or they are going for end-to-end service offered by, again, ODR platforms, which is that right from the serving of notice until the providing of awards, everything is done online. And the mechanisms used are any of the modes of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Now, this is the first phase of ODR, and this is what we are seeing across the world, and that is the stage at which India currently is. At an advanced stage, however, ODR holds immense potential to improve the entire dispute resolution experience itself. And by this, we mean we are looking at a future where there is likely to be automated dispute resolution systems, intelligent decision support systems, smart negotiation tools, customized dispute resolution experiences for different categories of disputes. A few countries, especially the first world countries, are already using a few of these, such as smart negotiation tools and automated resolutions attached to smart contracts. India is, however, yet to get there. So to put that in a gist, there are three key elements to ODR that we need to bear in mind before moving forward. One is that there is a certain threshold in the usage of technology that needs to be met. And the second is that ODR is not the same as virtual courts. Now, this distinction is important to draw because what we see in the market is ODR is used interchangeably with virtual courts, e-courts. However, ODR, in fact, is seen as a solution to the problems that our courts typically face and offer. So, Ms. Jain again pulled out statistics regarding the amount of pendency that is there in our public court system, the extent of delay that occurs on varieties of cases. So, in our public court system, even with the infusion of technology where we have e-filing, virtual hearings, all of those, it is still not enough to cater to the demand for effective and speedy resolution of disputes. This is especially the case in post-COVID era because there are a lot of disputes that have come about in the last 1 year, and that is truly affecting the business sentiments. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we cannot afford to have businesses stuck due to lack of avenues to resolve disputes. And that is where ODR comes into picture. It is something that is happening outside of the public court system and is an add-on to the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that already exist. So it increases the efficiency of dispute resolution outside of courts. And the third aspect that we need to bear in mind is that ODR is not a new mode of dispute resolution. So we cannot say put ODR along the same lines as arbitration, mediation, negotiations, and the fourth is ODR. That is not how it works. ODR, as I said, is technology plus dispute resolution mechanisms, and in its advanced stage, it can be much more in terms of automated dispute resolution mechanisms. So overall, the benefits of ODR are these. Some of them are, of course, quite intuitive, and some of them are a little subtle and also quite path-breaking. The first is, of course, that it is cost-effective. You don't have parties congregating in a place. You don't have to, book your flights, conference rooms, etc. So automatically, it is cost effective, and it is also cost effective because ODR is trying to move away from the typical way in which the arbitration ecosystem in India has developed. And here I will focus on arbitration mainly and not other forms of ADR, because arbitration, as we know, has become a rich person's game. This is something Ms. Jain referred to as well, because it is usually retired Supreme Court judges or High Court judges who are appointed as arbitrators. Now, small, medium-sized businesses can ill afford to have their disputes resolved through arbitration because they simply cannot afford to appoint the popular arbitrators that we currently have. The idea with ODR is to make dispute resolution scalable by having a larger pool of dispute resolution professionals who do not necessarily come from legal domain. So it is not just judges who have retired or lawyers who are trained to be mediators or arbitrators. It could essentially be any professional who is trained in the processes of law. So as long as he can uphold the principles of natural justice and can follow the rules prescribed in a few legislations, he or she can be a dispute resolution professional. And that is where the cost effectiveness of ODR will also come from, because we are imagining a scenario where lakhs of disputes will be resolved online, which will mean that we will also need a larger pool of dispute resolution professionals, and not all of them can come from the lawyers or judges community. So this is another interesting angle of ODR, which is also path-breaking, as I mentioned, because that will mean for specific categories of disputes, you can have qualified DRPs. For example, banking sector disputes are likely to be better served by retired senior banking professionals who are trained to resolve disputes. So that is one of the benefits. The second is that, of course, it is convenient. It is almost like justice is home delivered, because you are, accessing the platform from the comforts of your home and office. And that is a huge convenience factor as opposed to what we currently have in terms of going to the court or going to a different city, country to resolve through arbitration or mediation. The third is something which is more subtle, which is that it reduces unconscious bias. It is quite unfortunate, but we have seen that in our courts, the gender, caste, class, religion of parties might play a role in the way the judge handles the case or the way she decides the case. And this element has the potential to be reduced, if not completely eliminated, in ODR. And this, we can use different technology tools to say mask the identity of parties. And this also can play a huge role where it is documents only process, in the sense parties are not really sitting face to face virtually. It is the arbitrator who has been given documents from both the sides, and those are the only materials she is relying on while resolving disputes. So there is complete elimination of any form of unconscious bias. And the fourth is it allows for customizable processes. As I said, banking sector disputes may require a different kind of process as opposed to, say, a family dispute or any other form of contractual dispute. This level of customization is not available in our public court system. We are guided by CPC and other legislations, which are pretty hard cut in the way they prescribe the procedure. But in ODR, which is ADR plus technology, we can truly benefit from the freedom that is there with the arbitrator to customize processes so that both the parties derive optimal outcomes and efficiencies are truly, enhanced. Then we have the fact that all these benefits will ensure that dispute resolution is encouraged. At the moment, statistics show that, even with the kind of cases that are pending in the courts, that is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the number of disputes that actually exist. A lot of us, including the likes of us who are familiar with the laws and procedures, will hesitate to take our problems to court because we know that there is delay, there is inefficiencies in terms of cost and time. So we will not really opt for resolution of disputes. And that affects businesses the most because there are costs involved to pending and unresolved disputes. With all of these other factors coming in, which is efficiency, cost effectiveness, convenience, customizable processes, dispute resolution overall will become the norm. And that has potential snowballing effect, which is that our investment rankings might improve, the ease of doing business rankings might improve, and overall there is better legal health in the society. Now I'll go into the trends that we are seeing across the world. Let me just do a quick time check. I'll perhaps take around 5 to 7 minutes if that is all right. So we are seeing mostly 3 modes of ODR emerging across the world. The first one is the ODR initiatives that are run by the government itself. The second is the ODR services offered by the court. And the third is the emergence of private ODR platforms. Now, government-run ODR initiatives essentially are those where the government has designed, built a platform. It is owned by the government and it is opening it up to the citizens or a category of business to use for resolution of disputes. We are seeing this in the form of Samadhan portal that the government of India has initiated specifically for the MSME sector. We will look at similar initiatives in other parts of the world. In court annexed ODR services, these are essentially where technology has been infused into court annexed ADR centers. So court annexed mediation centers or your arbitration centers will have technology infused so that ODR can be used even for matters that are entering the court system and then are being referred for resolution through ADR. So this is typically under section 89 of CPC. Then we have private ODR platforms, and here again, as I mentioned, there are 2 forms that are emerging. One is where the private company offers just the technology layer, which is your virtual hearing tool, your breakout rooms, your transcription services. So it offers only technology, or it could offer an end-to-end service starting from notice to even enforcement of awards. So it is almost like a parallel private court system. And the categories of disputes that we are seeing is the popular ones, at least, are consumer disputes, any form of contractual disputes, family disputes, and disputes pertaining to MSME sector. I will just quickly take you through a few examples. Before going into this, I should mention that the very first instance of ODR is actually way back in 1990s, and that correlates with the birth of internet. So the first form of ODR was seen in the US, where eBay adopted an internal dispute resolution grievance redressal platform to address consumer-related disputes. It started in 1996, and now we see that eBay is actually resolving around 60 million disputes on a yearly basis on its ODR platform. So ODR, even though it might appear to be something that is new in the Indian context, has existed worldwide since 1990s. So with that, I'll just go up, mention a few of the government-run ODR initiatives. The one in the Europe is extremely popular, and it has existed for a few years. It is focused only on consumer disputes. And the statistics coming from there are extremely heartening. Lakhs of disputes, consumer disputes, are being resolved on the EU's ODR platform. The unique feature of EU online dispute resolution framework is that both the government, as in the EU itself, has an ODR platform that it offers at a subsidized rate, and it has also onboarded private ODR service providers so that the parties have choice. They are not forced to choose something that only the EU has built and is providing, but can also choose from other wide-ranging service providers at different price points. Again, in Brazil, we are seeing that it is a consumer case-focused ODR platform, and it is a time-bound dispute resolution mechanism where the government itself has prescribed the time limit within which companies can respond to these consumer complaints, and how they can, if these disputes remain unresolved, get into the court system. Court-annexed ODR services, they are actually path-breaking in the sense that this is a true mix of private and public dispute resolution offering, because it grants a sense of sanctity to ODR services. This is something that I should mention is happening in India as well. With the Niti Aayog report, the judiciary has been unflinching in its support to ODR. It recognizes that the public court system is extremely overburdened and is actively supporting mainstreaming of ODR. This legitimizes ODR as a process and should actually boost the industry's confidence in resorting to ODR. So a slight deviation there, but coming back to this specific example, which is what we see in Canada, where they have adopted a tiered model of dispute resolution. So the parties enter into negotiation on the platform first, and then it goes into facilitation or conciliation. And then the ODR outcomes are actually given the same sanctity as court orders. So they become immediately enforceable, and that is again a huge factor or a huge concern that is being taken care of in Canada through law. So ODR outcomes are the same as outcomes from a court of law. In China, again, we see a tiered model of dispute resolution now, where parties start with legal consultation. Now, this is important because the parties need to be aware of their rights and obligations under law before they go into dispute resolution mode. Understanding of their options, varieties of options that exist before them, is actually a huge step towards avoiding disputes. In fact, in a life cycle of dispute, the first stage is avoidance of disputes, then comes containment of disputes, then dispute resolution. China seems to have taken care of this stage of dispute avoidance as well by seeing if the parties can in fact do something to not get into a dispute situation. So after consultation, they go into negotiation. If dispute does arise, then mediation, arbitration, and litigation. So it is a seamless, tiered model of dispute resolution so that the parties don't have to go to different avenues for different stages of their dispute. Private ODR platforms, as I said, there are two modes. With what we are seeing with Resolver here is an end-to-end dispute resolution offering, and it is free of cost, and it is again focused on consumer courts. They raise funds, and this is something that needs to be kept in mind, as in it is a concern that needs to be addressed when we are talking about ODR in India. So far, justice has been the sole domain of public court system, but now we are essentially decentralizing justice delivery, and this is something Justice Chandrachud mentioned when he was recently talking about ODR, that it signifies decentralization of justice delivery. While that is obviously the need of the hour, it also comes with a few concerns that you now have private sector giving out justice. So how do we take care of conflict of interests and certain questions of biases, confidentiality, all of those in terms of data management is something that needs to be addressed, and the NITI report does go into that. Now, coming to India, I won't dwell on this because Ms. Jain already covered this. A few significant developments. Even though ODR has become like a buzzword now, this moment came about because of the build-up that has been there since way back in 2006. Internet domain disputes have always been resolved online. They have had a platform called INDRP, wherein domain name disputes were getting resolved since 2006. Then in 2011, in fact, there was an international forum on ODR held in Chennai, and someone who is called the mother of ODR, Ms. Chittu Nagarajan, in fact, is from India, and she is part of a worldwide council on ODR. So India truly is not really alien to this supposedly new entrant in the dispute resolution ecosystem. We have had our one foot in the door since long. Then in 2017, in fact, Ministry of Law and Justice put out a list of ODR service providers across the country, urging government departments to adopt ODR to resolve disputes. We know that government litigation is a huge concern, and that is creating a huge backlog in the judiciary. So to reduce that, ODR is seen as one of the main solutions, so that does not end up clogging the courts anymore. And in 2018, as I mentioned, there is Samadhan specifically curated for MSME sector disputes. However, quick succession of events have been seen in ODR landscape only across the last 2 years. It is heartening to see that I think there are more than a dozen ODR platforms currently active in India, catering to different kinds of disputes, and these are private sector ODR service providers. So clearly the market is buzzing, and that will eventually lead to more dispute resolution professionals and more cost-effective services being offered to all categories of businesses. And as I mentioned, now NITI Aayog's report is going to be out in the next month or so, and that should give a huge boost to ODR in India. So let me just talk about court-annexed ODR centers, because the other examples have already been covered. Recently, during pandemic, Delhi High Court's mediation center went online. They now offer online mediation services. The second point of e-Lok Adalats is actually extremely heartening. Lakhs of disputes have been resolved through online platforms attached to the Lok Adalat initiative across different states. So this truly shows that technology to some extent has percolated even to our tier 2, tier 3 cities, the kind of disputes that Lok Adalats usually see are not very high value, and you have ordinary individuals coming there to resolve their disputes, and even there ODR has played a key role. A few private ODR service providers, as I said, there are more than a dozen now. So it is really easy to look them up and see what are the various platforms that have curated services that suit the categories of disputes that any sector might have. A quick snapshot of all the services that these ODR centers are providing. They provide case intake assistance, they serve notice to parties, and this is critical because as per a study done by Vidhi, more than 1/3 of the life cycle of a case, that is if 100 days are spent in resolving a case in the court, 25 days are spent at the stage of serving notice. So that means that the archaic ways of contacting the other party no longer work, where we are now used to, accessing services at the click of a button. If, say, Flipkart or Amazon can reach a party, then why not a court notice? And that is where I think infusion of technology is playing a key role, because these ODR service providers are also serving notice to parties, and that is being done through varieties of electronic modes, emails, SMSs, WhatsApp messages, etc. Then there are negotiation facilities, online mediation facilities, case management facilities, which is again extremely important to ensure that all your case files are available in one mode, and more importantly, your concern of confidentiality and privacy are taken care of. Then there are transcription services, and a few of them also provide enforcement assistance. Having said all of these, it is also equally important for us to identify a few challenges that continue to exist in mainstreaming ODR. This is where both the judiciary and, most importantly, the government need to take urgent measures to ensure that these roadblocks are crossed. There are structural challenges in terms of, lack of digital infrastructure in a few areas, low digital literacy, and divide in access to technology. However, when we are talking about businesses, MSME sector, and the kind of disputes that the audience here may have, this should not really be a problem. So adoption of ODR should really be the way to go forward. And then there are behavioral changes, which is that there is lack of trust in ODR services, and also there is that mental barrier towards technology of any kind. So that needs to be overcome by constant positive messaging. And here I think the judiciary is already playing a key role by adopting technology in such a huge way, and that is going to filter down to benefiting ODR as well. Then there are operational challenges. As I mentioned, there are privacy and confidentiality concerns and availability of large pool of dispute resolution professionals, the need to change the archaic legal processes, especially in terms of notarization, stamping, enforcement. So all of these legal changes need to go hand in hand with the progress in technology. So e-notarization, e-stamping, or change in law to entirely do away with notarization where not necessary. So these are the legal side changes that need to happen to actually mainstream ODR across all categories of disputes. So these are the various measures that can be taken by the government, increasing access to digital infrastructure, training ODR professionals, building trust towards ODR, adoption of ODR by government and PSUs. Now, this is going to have multiple benefits. One is that it is going to help resolve government disputes sooner. So that is going to reduce the cost of litigation to the government, and at the same time, it is going to reduce the burden on the judiciary. And the third important takeaway from government adopting ODR will be that it will boost confidence in ODR as a mode to resolve disputes, even by common persons, individuals, businesses, etc. Then the government also needs to encourage growth of private ODR platforms by perhaps providing tax incentives, or by onboarding a few private ODR platforms to provide services as part of a government initiative, something that we have seen in China, Canada, etc. And the last is provide a suitable regulation for ODR. Now we have an arbitration legislation, we have a mediation legislation which is currently in the works. It will really help if ODR norms and requirements are sort of encapsulated in an umbrella legislation which takes into account both the existing mechanisms as well as potential future developments. So with this, I will stop my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the very detailed presentation on the ODR. We planned for almost longer discussion for almost 30 minutes, but we are left with almost 10 minutes now. On a very lighter vein, I was just wondering, we have the first two presentations where the government was there to speak for 20 minutes each. Both the government people have spoken for almost 10 minutes. Both the lawyers have spoken for 30 minutes. So government speaks less, and that's okay. Now coming.
The occupational hazard.
Fine, I can understand. So next one. In any case, I just want, since we have just 10 minutes, I want to raise concerns by some of the participants online and sometimes with the offline with the current alternate dispute measure. And I will be, since we have 10 minutes, I will be looking quick 2-3 minutes reply from each one of you. But let me first say what kind of the concerns which are coming. We are rightly saying, even the government through the many legislations has said that we should have an arbitration rather than going to the court, and the reason is obvious. Having said this, we have seen a tendency within a government that even if the case is referred to the arbitration, almost each one of those cases ended up in the court subsequently, because we do not want to. And many people will start asking the same question: in case each and every case needs to go to the court eventually, then why you should have an arbitration except one? Having said this, not only that, we are also now saying let's have a conciliation, mediation. We know the way the habits are there. We are not going to accept each one of them. That will only prolong the dispute resolution period, and eventually we will wait for the Supreme Court ruling on each and every case possible. We have seen even the Niti Aayog case where the 75% payment has to be made, might have some deterrent, but it still has not worked. We have seen in the case of a NHAI arbitration worth almost 70 to 80,000 crores are pending. Number one. Let me also say there's another side of the problem, exactly opposite to this. People say sometimes the quality of the arbitration awards itself is not good. And people, when they say, of course, they can't say on the record, obviously, and they won't be really looking to have a hazard of identifying the case because many of the awards are given by the very prominent people in their field. The quality of the awards really doesn't good enough. And the arbitration laws, and very rightly again, given by the statute and even by the courts really have rightly stopped going to the merit of the case, which was the intention in any case. Now we have two problems totally opposite to each other. One, we are not, sometimes the arbitration quality is not good, but we don't have any other way out. The things may move to the court, but may not work. One. Secondly, even if the arbitration quality is good, we do not change our habits. Maybe the institutional change is there, and everything lining up the court. Maybe we may have a reaction starting from Mr. Rao.
Yes, sir, you rightly said. It is our past experience that ultimately, eventually, it is ending up in the courts of law only. So, in order to avoid, we have experimented various measures in GAIL, and we could get better results than this arbitration mechanism. Prior to arbitration, we are giving options to contractor a Samadhan. That is also, it is coincidentally, it is MSC Samadhan portal name. But around 3 years back, we have, before this MSC Samadhan, we have already have that Samadhan in our GAIL. which is very well in place, where we are setting three senior people in the company not associated with the dispute, and the concerned our engineer in charge, a Gail person, is presenting this dispute to this Samadhan when he is unable to resolve this. That worked well, and these three senior people ultimately, if it may not be in as per contract, then only this dispute comes to Samadhan when it is not clearly spelled out in the contract document. So then these three people is taking a certain lenient way, and they are convincing both. In any case, they are from Gale, so therefore sometimes it get fails also. So certain cases we are stopping at Samadhan level itself, and we are able to get resolution for that, and we are happily moving on. Then the other cases which further move to look for arbitration, then where again we have a settlement advisory where we are adopting three independent external people. Those are prominent in those fields like CPWD and some legal personality and some chartered accountant. These normally we have paneled conciliators. We are asking contractor to choose, or we ourselves would nominate these three people so that they're independent of the company activities, so that many things we are now getting through this conciliation the process. Then it is going to our board, because it is a decision taken by outsiders. It is to be ratified by our board, and once it is through, then we are whatever settlement pronounced by this conciliator team, we are following that without going to courts or arbitration. Then the last option left with contractor is arbitration. Then you can see our graph. Since several years we used to have 15 to 20 arbitration cases earlier years. Now it is surprisingly we have now three arbitration cases. Means we have successfully get reduced these disputes through those two mechanisms, Samadhan and as a settlement advisory committee. So this is what my personal and organizational experience in Gale that successfully are doing. In any case, okay, arbitration, there are few skeletal cases. We are now mostly comfortable on this front, dispute resolution, at least in Gale. And it is good that Deepika has introduced this ODR. Still our legal team is working on it, but through this forum I can able to get some insights of the ODR functioning and knowledge about ODR. Thank you, Sanjay sir.
Thank you very much. I think this is one of the rare case study within the government where the arbitration cases has been reduced to such a less number. Great to hear this. Pratibha, your comments on these issues?
So I would agree that, if in practice what ends up happening is, especially for government contracts and for even in case of certain PSUs, if you are going to take the matter till Supreme Court, even though there is an arbitration, then the delays may not help. But there have been significant changes in the Arbitration Act, which have helped reduce the timelines for arbitration, reduce the reasons for which you can challenge the arbitration, and they're pretty much limited to, if the arbitration agreement is not valid, or if there is a question on the impartiality of the arbitrators, or proper process, etc., was not followed. And the Supreme Court and the High Courts have, over the last decade or so, been very careful about, except for a few recent judgments, they've been very good about not taking up the challenges to, especially the foreign arbitrations. So that has really helped. Like, we have effectively done cross-border dispute resolutions through arbitrations very effectively in time-bound manners. And mainly where it has helped, at least in the private sector, is getting the parties to sit across the table once the arbitration judgment comes and settle the dispute, because they know it's going to be very costly affair than to take it to the Supreme Court. The challenge does remain with respect to government contracts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Deepika, you want to add something, especially because you're working very closely with the code committees and Niti Aayog?
Sure. Well, actually, I have a slightly different take on this. You're right that the way arbitration landscape has developed in India, at least in the initial phases, the entire purpose of arbitration was defeated because both before and after arbitration, you were essentially spending time and money in court. However, now things have improved. But as Ms. Jane rightly said, with government and PSUs, the true benefit of arbitration is yet to accrue, I think, mostly because of the manner in which government officials approach arbitration. I think there is a huge gap in the way the mandate is given to, say, a legal officer of a company and a legal officer in a PSU or a government department. From what we have understood, they are not equally empowered to represent the government or take decisions on behalf of the department to effectively contribute in that dispute resolution process. From this, what I mean is that in case there is a mediation, you need to have that authority to represent the government's stance in that room or over that negotiation table. If you're not empowered to do that, then the outcome is bound to be shaky, which will get challenged. Because at the end of the day, the government official is concerned about appearing to be impartial and portraying that there are no unseen forces playing a role in what he or she is representing during that dispute resolution. So I believe there are a lot of background factors at play which prevent the government from benefiting from arbitration and mediation. And this is where the government really needs to take some measures, perhaps to train the officials who are participating in these dispute resolution mechanisms, and also perhaps through notices, circulars, empower them to represent the government effectively in these ADR mechanisms.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the perspective. And to summarize or to just wrap up the session, firstly, I want to thank each one of you for bringing very new perspective. And just a last word, I've seen recently the case of NHAI, which I just mentioned, where the large number of arbitration cases are pending. And one of the recommendation, which appears to be very nice recommendation by the government, to have a dispute resolution board. And that will be, you can say, a part of the mediation or the conciliation is there. Having said this is effectively just the dispute resolution time has increased rather than decreased, because everything still goes to the arbitration. That really questions us the efficacy of the whole thing. Not only that, okay, and not only that, I've seen one more thing which has happened. Okay, World Bank is the sponsor for this seminar, so they should not feel offended about it. I've seen World Bank has also recommended we should have a similar dispute resolution board all across. No, I am okay, because theoretically it makes very sound thing. But let's see whether it has worked, because something which might have worked globally might not have been working in India. And rather than having a dispute resolution board, let's try to understand why it is not working in NHA and why it is working for the GAIL. To me, having a sweeping kind of a recommendation without going to such a detail may be fraught with many practical difficulties. That is the message I want to say. Each and every case is different. Let's not try to have one recommendation and which should be uniformly given to everyone. With this message, I want to stop here, and I want to thank all of you for making this session. Over to you, Aima. Thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks Sanjay Agarwal for chairing the session so wonderfully. Thanks to R.M. Rao, Ms. Pratibha Jain, and Ms. Deepika Kinhal for joining us today and sharing so much of knowledge. Let's have a round of applause for the session chair and the speakers.